This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome into this special Election Day edition of the Bartholomew Town Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Bartholomew. Today, I'm joined by the one and only Jim Hummel. All right, folks, can you believe it? Here we are, Election Day 2020, and obviously the election's been going on for quite some time with emergency voting, a.k.a. early voting, taking place, mail ballots, and so forth. And we've actually had quite a high number of mail ballots here in the Ocean State. And look, it's hardly top secret that we may not know the answer to who won the presidency until, I don't know, a week from now. We've been talking about that here on the pod for quite some time. But it's interesting, and you'll hear Hummel talk about this coming up in the episode, that we might actually have a decent perspective on local elections on election night or even the day after. Of course, the big race in House District 15 in Cranston, will Speaker Mattiello be able to hold off Barbara Ann Fenton-Fung? We've got question one pertaining to Providence Plantations and removing that aspect of the state's name, and a lot of General Assembly races around the state that might give us a little bit of insight into the structure of power in Rhode Island going forward into 2020. But of course, it's a presidential election year unlike any other, and you'll hear also in this episode how this election year and the procedures, the mechanics behind how people are voting, some of the attitudes, some of the presentations that we've seen from the candidates may alter elections going forward. So this episode, I'm actually dropping a little bit early. Normally we have Tuesday and Friday episodes. I'm putting this out on Monday night to give a little bit more time. So if you're heading to the polls early, you can get a little bit of insight. Now, I want to let you know, throughout the day, on Election Day, I'm going to be broadcasting from all around the state. I've got interviews set up with candidates. I'll be out kind of getting the pulse of some voters. The best way to follow that is going to be to go to BTOWN.stream. That'll take you to the Bartholomew Town Podcast Facebook group, and I'll be doing some live streaming throughout the day. As I said, be down in Newport, we'll be in Cranston, we'll be up north, we'll be in Providence, we'll be down in South County. We'll bring you the pulse of the state as it's happening throughout the day. And then on election night itself, if something comes up that's worthy of it, I'll break in again as well. But we'll probably all have our eyes on the networks. Brown University is also doing an election night panel, and so on and so forth. So Jim Hummel, you know him from the Hummel Report, hummelreport.org. You also read him in the Providence Journal. You hear him on WPRO, and you watch him on Rhode Island PBS, host of A Lively Experiment. So sit back and enjoy this episode, or drive around and enjoy it, whatever you do when you're listening to BTOWN. It's a fun one, and I'd be remiss not to remind you, last week we did daily pods here on BTOWN. We had the Public's Radio Scott McKay on talking presidential election. We talked to Rep. Williams and Deb Suggs, who's an advocate for Providence Plantations being removed from the state name. We talked to Attorney General Nerona with the latest on the Jamal Gonzalez investigation. We talked to Dr. Megan Ranney of Brown University and Rhode Island Hospital with the latest on COVID-19 in Rhode Island. And we spoke with John Flaherty of Grow Smart Rhode Island on a proposal to break up Kennedy Plaza and kind of create a multi-hub situation, something that's really impacting a lot of people who take the bus here in Rhode Island, and they seem to be having a really hard time getting their voices in the room when it comes to addressing this DOT proposal to break up Kennedy Plaza. All that's there for you wherever you're listening right now, ripodcast.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get shows. All right, BTOWN is a listener-supported show. You can help out in a few ways. Number one, leave a rating and a review wherever you're listening right now. Number two, share an episode on social media. And if you want to take it a step further, number three, you can become a BTOWN insider. Simply head to patreon.com/BartholomewTown, where for as little as $3 per month, you may help to sustain the independent journalism, opinion, analysis, and entertainment that we've become known for. As a $10 per month BTOWN Insider member, you'll get exclusive monthly content. It's patreon.com/BartholomewTown, or click the support link where you're listening right now. Okay, let's get to it. Election 2020 coverage with Jim Hummel. Right out of the gate, what are your big takeaways? Presidential, local, what are you looking for? We're not going to have definitive results most likely on election night. So what are you kind of looking for as we head into votes are starting to be tallied, I guess?
Well, I think so. There's going to be a little disconnect on national versus local. I will tell you, 2 months ago, the snapshot, Bill, was we could be waiting days because there were going to be so many mail ballots. And all you need to do is follow the numbers. 2.5 months ago, the Secretary of State and the Board of Elections were saying we're expecting 375,000 to 400,000 requests for mail ballots. It only came in at about 175. And what we've seen in this newly created they call it, technically it's called emergency ballots. Everybody colloquially refers to it as early voting. And I interviewed Nick Lima for a couple of different stories I was doing, and he's the director of elections in Cranston. And the one thing that stood with me is he said, we will never vote again the way we did in previous elections. This election has changed the way we will vote. So many people I know have gone to the polls already and either taken advantage of the early voting, taken their mail ballot and delivered it, or got their mail ballot in early. So I always wait till election day. It's like our Super Bowl. And my precinct is a 5-minute walk. It's a local elementary school where my kids went from my house. So I will go just because I like to vote on election day. Honestly, I think when most people go across the state, they're going to find the lines on election day are a lot shorter than they were maybe to even go early voting at your town hall. So what does that mean? That the Board of Elections has already, they've broken with tradition. The early voting and just so you know the nuts and bolts, goes into a machine at town hall or wherever you vote. It gets tabulated immediately an hour after the polls close that night. So that machine will be factored in. All those people early voted, and the mail ballots are already being counted. They're doing this in phases. So I think in Rhode Island, except for that off council race or maybe, Nick Mattiello's in a close race, I think here we're going to know the results pretty quickly within a day, maybe 2 on the stragglers. So although the machine ballots are always the ones that come in and everybody knows, I don't know the feeling you get. You've been out and about. I think so many people have taken advantage of the early voting, and those are going to be immediate results.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be, it is definitely 2 different stories. Obviously, we can kind of assume Joe Biden's going to win in Rhode Island anyway, so I guess that conversation is somewhat moot. But it will be interesting to see, obviously, District 15, that's sort of the major race. Question 1, how does that play out? It's really up in the air. I've heard from people who have said throughout the year that, look, I didn't vote for approving question, whatever the number was, but Providence Plantations in 2010. But my opinion has shifted dramatically. I've also heard from people who have said there's no way that we should change the name of the state for any number of reasons, whether they're concerned about changing history or just not really paying attention to the concerns of a vocal group of people who have come out and said, look, we got to change the name of the state. It's going to be interesting to see how that lands. I'm also interested in, you look down, I believe it's District 36, where Justin Price, the Republican, is being challenged by Megan Cotter. That's an area where, we saw these big progressive wins in September in the Democratic primary. But what kind of shifts are we going to see in places that are really leaning red consistently, really in the rural spots of the state? Are we going to actually see changes in terms of a progressive defeating a conservative in those areas? And what will that say about the dynamics of who is elected Speaker of the House and Senate President and things of that nature? So I don't know if you're interested in that at all, as far as looking at local races and how that might sculpt leadership going forward.
Oh, absolutely. And then, Anthony Giarrusso is mounting to come back against Justine Caldwell. So Republican versus progressive. And that was his seat. So he's trying to come back. Janine Culkin knocked off the guy who had knocked her off 2 years ago. The question is, Bill, will they have enough? It's all votes. And look, I don't think Nick Mattiello, if he does win, I think then he gets in as speaker again. And you remember 2 years ago with the Progressive Caucus, the Democratic women mounted this big challenge. And he gave them, I think smartly politically, the abortion rights, which we know is now huge. They were worried about it when Brett Kavanaugh got chosen for the Supreme Court. Now it's even more so, because if Roe v. Wade gets overturned, it's not like, okay, abortion's outlawed across the country. It goes back to the states. So you have to be worried probably if you live in Alabama, not so much here in Rhode Island. So Mattiello at that point gave them, I won't call it a bone, but he gave them a few wins to kind of tamp down the vocal opposition. Now you have people like Tiara Mack, who beat Harold Metz. You have Cynthia Mendez, is it, who beat
Yes.
Bill Connolly.
Yep.
Those were the two huge, and they're already calling for leadership changes at the top. So I know Leanna Kassar, out here in the East Bay, says, she wants to run for speaker. The reality of getting the votes in the chamber, she may have all of her little progressive friends, I don't say that pejorative, they're little, have her progressive friends ready to back her, but you need a lot more votes than that. And the big question is, Bill, will the Republicans side with the progressives? They're diametrically opposed philosophically. Would they side with them in order to be able to sustain a veto? Or maybe go to the speaker and say, we need, whoever that is, we want this. So in theory, it sounds nice that the progressives are banging the drum and we want to get in there. Let's see how many win on Election Day and how that looks going forward. And then you always have the infighting. Who's going to want, even if Mattiello gets taken out, Joe Saccarci has got long and deep, not only pockets, but deep relationships. And he probably has the same numbers that Mattiello does. So it's a lot of steps to get from here to there to see a progressive takeover. Having said that, I do think they're going to have a voice in whoever the speaker is in the General Assembly, just as the Women's Caucus made a big, a lot of sound and fury a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and Gail Golden on the Senate side as well, similarly, maybe making a challenge in theory to President Ruggiero. Cranston's an interesting place. It's a hotbed of we've got a mayoral contest there. Alan Fung is, I guess, term limited. Is that accurate?
Yeah, he's out. He's done 10 years. 2 of those were full terms, and then he was I think he had filled an unexpired term. Either way, he's out.
Yes. So you have a question there of whether or not it's been a polite race, actually, 2 candidates that have been, it hasn't sunk into the gutter at this point. But when you talk about the District 15 House race, Barbara Ann Fenton Fung really lobbying Speaker Mattiello or trying to paint a picture that he's part of a broad, corrupt
criminal enterprise.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, don't hold it back. That's what she's saying.
So do you think that can win over voters? And of course, bear in mind, District 15, one of the more conservative districts in the state. Does the value of having the speaker represent your district outweigh anything else in this race? Or do you get the sense that there may be some people who say, you know what, it's time for change. We trust that Fung brand. And you know what, we do think that in spite of legislative grants and other influential elements of having Nick Mattiello return to the General Assembly, that it may be time for change. How does that shape up?
Well, I think it's both. I think there are people who are like, he's making the pitch, I'm bringing home the bacon. The Cranston Western Little League, we got the $10,000 for your new dugout or whatever it is. But I do think that having the Fung name helps a lot. And Mayor Fung has been going around with his wife door to door. So, it really does come down to that may be a race. It may be till the end of the week because they have to do every last ballot. I do think, in the words of the late Buddy Cianci, I do think there is a little gum on Mattiello's shoes. I think there will be some voters who are just tired of the scandals. Ray Gallison gets taken away by the feds, and he's had other issues with his leadership team. And now you see Greg Costantino, just one of the leaders, just resigning abruptly with no mention as to why. And the Jeff Britt trial, look, even though Mattiello was not criminally charged, it reinforced what everybody believes. You got high-priced people on the state taxpayers' rolls who are running campaigns for the speaker. There's no other way around it. Leo Skenyon and Jeff Britt. And I did a Hummel report in 2017 on how much the General Assembly spends on itself. Yep. $44 million. And I remember asking the speaker, all these part-time lawyers who get full-time health benefits, and I said specifically Matt Jerzik, because he was working as deputy counsel to, I think, Joe Saccarci, the House Majority Leader. And I said, okay, I give you that they have a busy session. What's he doing in July, August, September, October, November, December? And all the speaker said was, well, we have him working on special projects. Yeah. We know the special project now is getting him reelected. So are people in the district like, okay, we know that already. It's kind of like the people for Trump. He has a way about him, but he's getting the stuff that we want done on our agenda. Or are they going to finally say, how many times do we have to read about the speaker who represents our district with embarrassing stories. So that's a big fudge on my part. I have no prediction on that race. I mean, I think there are going to be people in each camp. Look, Steve Frias, without the Fung name, came to within 85 votes on election night 4 years ago. Will she be able to push it over the top? And I think that most people understand they're not voting for the next Speaker of the House. They're voting for somebody who is going to then get rid of the Speaker for whatever reason, and then she becomes part of the Republican minority. So,
yeah, it's going to be really interesting to watch. Obviously, all eyes on Cranston. I'm sure you'll see the news vehicles for the three television stations, perhaps even the Steve Klamkin mobile over there, the WPRO vehicle in Cranston, no doubt about it. All right, shifting to the presidential contest, obviously really difficult to say at this point. I mean, you talk to one person, they say, look, Joe Biden is going to, I saw a poll the other day, I think it was either 538 or one of those polling websites, that he's got a 93% chance of victory. At the same time, I remember Hillary Clinton, the New York Times said, had like a 96% chance of victory this day 4 years ago. Do you think that there are people, as Matt Allen has been describing it, who are somewhat embarrassed about the fact that they support Trump because of the behavioral issues, but from a political standpoint, they support Trump, so they're that silent voter? And do you think that on a national level, we're going to have enough people come to the polls with a Trump, I guess a silent Trump vote, that will actually make this closer than some of the analysts are predicting?
Well, look, it always narrows closer to the race, and Trump has been. I can't listen to it anymore. He's basically, everything that comes out of his mouth is like, Joe Biden's going to destroy the earth, and the economy is going to fall apart. And I had this discussion with somebody over the weekend. What they fail to remember on either side, Joe Biden or President Trump, there are three branches of government. So you can't look. Barack Obama had a hard time working with the Republicans in his second term. So he issued. What did he do? He went around them and issued a whole pile of executive orders, which got eliminated by Trump within the first week he was in office, if not the first day. What has Trump done? He's had a hard time, so he started saying, we're going to use this money for the wall, and we're going to do this. And what's happened? Federal court judges have said, or appeals court have said, no, you can't do that. So the larger picture of that the United States is going to change dramatically. Obviously, the Supreme Court makes a huge difference. But as it goes toward Election Day, here's the key number to me. And I'm one of these people. In 2016, 8 to 10, I think it was 10-ish million people, fewer voters turned out, voted in the presidential race one way or the other than did in 2012 for Barack Obama. And so you ask, that's a big number. Who are those people? Those people are Jim Hummel, who could not pull, for the first time in his life, and I've been voting since 1980, could not pull the trigger for either President Trump or Hillary Clinton. I couldn't stomach either one of them for a variety of reasons on either side. So I went to my little elementary school. I voted every single race on the ballot except for president. So if those people come out, and Trump didn't win the popular vote back then. It's all about the Electoral College. If those people come out in key, because I think a lot of them thought, I can't vote for Hillary Clinton, but she's going to win anyway. So, what does it matter? If those people come out, and most of those people will be Biden voters, they sat on the sidelines, not because they thought Trump was great or whatever, that he was going to coast to victory. Most of those are Democrats who were disillusioned with the candidate. So if you even get half of them to come out and target it in some of the swing states, I think that will make a difference. We know now that voter turnout is huge. So the crystal ball question is, does that skew better for Republicans or Democrats?
Absolutely. That's the key factor right now. What about after the election? We keep hearing, you can spend hours on YouTube looking at these prepper videos of the civil unrest that's coming. You got to get 4 weeks supply of food and buy a gas mask or whatever it may be. Do you get the sense that, given the climate that we're in right now in general, that we are heading into a period of unprecedented civil unrest, regardless of who wins the presidency?
Well, I think it depends on how it plays out. And look, the president has he just denied in an Axios report, the Axios report that says he's already planning to declare victory if it looks like he's ahead on, and then let the chips fall where they may. I do think there's going to be court challenges and contested, and now we know why he wanted to have all those federal judges right across the country that he and Mitch McConnell have engineered the last couple of years. I do think So here's what I think. If Biden is significantly ahead in the machine vote on Tuesday night, I think there are going to be people around Trump who are going to say, look, this is not going our way. You can go kicking and screaming if you want, but really the chips are not falling our way. What'll be interesting to me, Bill, is what if Trump is down on election night? Then then he's going to say, let's wait for the mail ballots, which I've disparaged across the country. And there are Trump voters who are using mail ballots. I mean, they're in rural areas and other areas that they don't feel like going in. So I don't buy into the fact that all of the mail ballots are going to be going toward Joe Biden. I really don't. I just don't. And I think mail ballots have be what we started out this discussion with have become less of a factor because I think of early voting and people who just want to get up and go to their polls. Will there be civil unrest? I don't know. I mean, look, the Democrats, and this has been the Republican rub, they never fully accepted that Trump won as president. And did they start impeachment from the beginning? I don't necessarily buy into that, but there are a lot of Democrats who have never wrapped their head around the fact he was constitutionally elected. You may hate his style. You may hate that he lies every day. You may hate his policies, but the way our system is set up, he was duly elected. And you know what? In less ambiguity than Bush Gore. Back in 2000, the hanging chads, and it came down to Florida. Trump had a greater mandate than that. And George Bush, so we're in different times. 20 years later, there are people who don't, Trump has set that tone of kind of this brash, stretching the truth, all of that. So the question going forward is, the New York Times had a great piece. He has changed the dynamic so much about the way the president governs. Will we ever go back to normalcy again? That's the question.
Discover over 200 episodes of Rhode Island's podcast of record, the Bartholomew Town Podcast, on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your pods. Or head over to our website, ripodcast.com. And another reminder that I'll be bringing you live content throughout the state on Election Day. The best way to follow this is to join the Bartholomew Town Podcast Facebook group. An easy way to get there is to head to btown.stream or simply search Bartholomew Town on Facebook. You may also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Bill Bartholomew. Look, elections are changing. It's almost certainly going to be different going forward. And what about what is it going to take to get elected? Does Trump set a tone that allows for this sort of behavior to be accepted as the norm as we move into 2024, 28, so on and so forth? You got to wonder if the demeanor, the conduct of what is considered presidential has shifted in the hearts and minds of enough Americans that we're going to see a transition almost to a new style of president on a regular basis. In other words, this isn't an outlier, this Trump administration.
Well, I do think it is an outlier. I don't think there's anybody quite like Donald Trump, honestly, and that was the appeal. And look, I've said this when I fill in on talk radio. I get why people voted for Trump. I didn't. I know there were some Democrats who did, some Republicans, because they looked at Washington and they looked at the inaction. What has Washington done for me? At the microcosm, it's people who come to me as a reporter, and they say, I went to my town council. I went to my state rep. I went to my the police. I got blown off. You are my last resort. And a lot of times we are able to bring light to it, and it changes. Not all the time. Those are the people who looked at Washington and said, they look at the congressional delegation here, and they're like, what have they done for us other than Jack Reed bringing a lot of bacon home and Sheldon Whitehouse, making 400 speeches on climate change? In my day-to-day life, what have they done for me? Name one major piece of legislation that Jim Langevin has passed. I know he's on the cybersecurity, but he's just basically been kind of there for 20 years. And so those people are the ones who said, screw it. How bad can it get? Let's go with Donald Trump. Some of them are having buyer's regret. Some of them are saying this whole promises made, promises kept baffles me. I'm not sure what the promises kept. I mean, the wall, that's kind of mixed feeling. He never got Mexico to pay for it. A lot of the stuff that he's gone forward with has been reversed by courts or not been able to get through legislatively. So I do think that Donald Trump is unique. If you look at anybody who would be a player going forward, Nikki Haley, I don't even know who the Republicans are on, unless it's Don Trump Jr. I can't imagine.
Oh, God.
But
Ivanka
if
Trump.
you,
yeah.
Yeah, but if you look at Marco Rubio or any of those guys,
Yeah.
none of those guys are going to act the way Donald Trump is. In fact, so many Republicans right now, Mitch McConnell, you see them pulling back because they listen. I always think of it like the New York Times. He says they're failing. Presidents have come and presidents have gone, and what's still here? The New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. So long after Donald Trump is gone, either this election cycle or the next, these guys have got to live with governing with each other. And so the other scenario we've talked about this on Lively. I think if Biden wins, then it's a blue wave, and I think that the Senate has a pretty good chance of going. If he doesn't win, then then I don't think the Senate's going to go Democrat. But just in the theoretical world that you and I play in, what if Biden wins and it's still a Republican Congress? What if Trump wins and it becomes a Democratic Congress? Yeah. I mean, it sets up what happens in the next 2 years and 4 years, and it's a crystal ball question. But I honestly think if Biden wins, then Mitch McConnell's a totally different person. Because look, Bill, they've gotten their third justice on the Supreme Court. What's it all about? Judges, abortion. You have evangelical Christians who apparently are not paying attention to what Jesus said about being kind to your neighbor. They love Trump, but somehow that all gets wiped out because it's all about abortion. It's all about the conservative agenda. And we had on Lively, 2 weeks ago, we had the former dean of the Roger Williams Law School, Michael Yelnowski. He had an unbelievable insight because I had asked him this and he didn't know offhand, and then he got back to me. Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, 8 years of presidency, each only had 2 Supreme Court justices.
Wow.
Trump, 3 in his first term. And so, again, Donald Trump comes and goes. Amy Coney Barrett's going to be there probably for the rest of my natural lifetime, right? Because these people go on forever. And if he gets elected again, Clarence Thomas takes off, and then they elect somebody else. So it's a long way of saying I don't think there's going to be another Donald Trump. You just can't look. The guy was a reality television star. He has enough money. The failures and the successes. He's a unique individual, and I can't imagine anybody else coming up through the ranks of government who would act like that. Will they push the envelope a little bit? Yes. But every day you wonder, what is Trump going to say? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I agree with that completely. I mean, at the end of the day, maybe on the local level, we saw even Joe Trillo try to emulate some elements of Donald Trump in the gubernatorial race a couple of years ago. But it is hard to imagine someone could take that bombastic approach or even a celebrity approach. We had all this business with Kanye West. Get real. How is that ever going to translate across enough of the political spectrum, get enough people riled up or excited, whatever it may be? Probably never again, in my opinion, at least not for quite some time. And I think people will look back on this period, whether Trump wins tomorrow or in a week, whenever it's counted or not, and it will definitely go down as one of those presidents that, 5 presidents when you're in 3rd grade. I think Donald Trump will be one of those people that stands out just based on the anomaly of his behavior. But it remains to be seen whether or not somebody else is able to get that kind of momentum going. All right, last quick question here. What's the big issue on voters' minds when they're heading to the polls, when it comes to local presidential ballot referendum questions? Is it COVID? Is it social injustice? Is it the budgets of the state, or broadly speaking, the debt that we're now getting further and further into during a Republican presidency, which is odd, but what's the big issue on people's minds?
Well, I'm not sure the social justice issues. They see what's going on in Providence. Most people are, outliers. Even some sections of Providence, they're not having people demonstrate in their neighborhood. So that's something we look at, but it's not, part of our day-to-day lives, most of us.
Yep.
I do think the financial insecurity, and Trump likes to paint, greatest economy ever. It's as if there was a stop, the time stopped in January or February. 11 million jobs added back on the 22 million that were lost because of the pandemic. Yeah. So I do think, this surge does not help him across the country because his base will go over a cliff for him. But the average person sitting there, and I'm not sure that they think Joe Biden is going to solve all of it. But I do think they hear and know more of compassion. And I do think in some of these Rust Belt states, you go to Pennsylvania and Michigan and Ohio, that they are seeing the headlines on their local news every day. Hospitals are overflowing, unemployment rate is this. So as I like to say, where you stand depends on where you sit. If you're financially secure going forward, the economy's been good for you, the tax cuts are good, fine, let's keep it going. I think there's a lot of unease across the country about financial stability. Am I going to have a job? Am I still trying? We haven't seen any stimulus since the first round.
Right.
I'm getting kicked out of my apartment. The big question is, will that translate actually to the votes? Will that actually be, people going to the polls? The other thing I wanted to mention, I forgot to when we were talking a couple of minutes ago, this is because I do this. I played out the scenarios if it's close and what happens. Let me ask you, has there ever been an electoral college tie in the history of the United States?
Wow. I don't think there has.
Early 1800s, Andrew Jackson. And you know who decides if there's a tie?
Senate President?
The House of Representatives.
Wow.
So that's a very
here.
Yeah. Well, I read a lot. There is obviously there's a very infinitesimal. It's like having Mattiello's race is tied, right?
Yeah.
That would happen, but if that does happen, that shows why it was important for the Democrats to take back the chamber in 2018. They weren't obviously thinking about that, but that shift over just to have one chamber of Congress is going to be incredibly important going forward.
That's extremely fascinating. That's something you're probably only going to hear right here today. That note, I haven't heard that mentioned yet at all. So fascinating stuff.
Always trying to bring new information to BTOWN, Bill. You can only know so much.
That's right.
What is your prediction? How long do you think it's going to take for us to know the presidential race?
I think we'll know for sure by this coming weekend. I think there'll be enough. The pathway to victory will be closed off significantly enough, and the unlikely opportunity to overcome that pathway will be kind of obvious to the loser. I think Biden will win. I do. I think it'll be by the end of this coming week that we really understand that to be the case. Now, does that mean that Trump leaves office without legal challenges or anything else? I'm not sure, but I do think Biden gets it done by the end of this week. We'll know for sure. And you?
It's interesting. I watched John Dickerson. He's been doing a series of pieces for CBS Sunday Morning. Just a great show. It's kind of what every reporter dreams at, doing long form pieces, once every couple of weeks. He had a commentary piece and he said that, the president has said no vote should be counted after Election Day. Well, since the history of time, it's not anything new. They have been counting. But it takes a couple of days to sort everything out. Now, that's to certify the election. In most elections, you have enough in the machine ballot. What makes it different this year is in some states, maybe the machine ballot is only 50% of the vote, right? So, So the counting of the mail ballots, okay, the Board of Elections will officially certify it Friday, but the race has been decided long before that. But those ballots are all being counted after that. So, clearly the president is no constitutional scholar either.
No, I think we know that pretty well. All right. So we've just had interesting dive into North Providence, political minutia. We've heard about school bus windows, which, by the way, it's fascinating because I asked Dr. Alexander Scott on Wednesday, hey, you're saying no carpools, but then you've got school buses rolling with windows open. So where's the science behind it? You dove into that on the Hummel Report in the Providence Journal. What else do we have coming up Hummel Report wise?
Well, I'm taking a look at, I have a story coming up about the wedding industry is trying to just really stay afloat. And some of the proposals they're coming up with, I had mentioned this to the governor a couple of weeks ago. So I've been kind of loosely in touch with them. The school bus story sounds so basic, but it's where common sense eludes government. And I texted you, I may have said it to you at the briefing because, we sit very next to each other. Let me preface this by saying all these people have very difficult jobs. The governor takes the incoming. People think, do you pre-screen the questions? No, she's taking any and every question on everything. So I give her credit for that. She doesn't always have the answer. Dr. Alexander Scott was not born a bureaucrat. And so she's kind of getting into this. What I find most maddening was on the school bus question, it came from a father in Exeter whose kids are on the bus for 45 minutes each way. A 5 and a 7-year-old. Can you imagine? And every window's wide open and these kids are miserable and sometimes wet when they get to school. So I asked Dr. Alexander Scott, just look, can you loosen up on this a little bit? What's the science? She went into the whole 10 minutes about how we know about airflow and it helps and whatever. And I said to somebody afterwards, it's like you ask somebody what time it is and they tell you how to make a watch.
Yeah, that was me.
And I think that's what a lot of people look, just, I'm not sure if the governor's listening to your podcast or anybody else. Here's a little advice. Cut down with everything that we've heard over and over. You don't need to do a 45-minute pregame show because the more interesting answers come from the questions. So you know what? You don't have to remind me to wear a mask and wash my hands and all that like we've done 437 times. Yeah. Get to the root of it, do a 20-minute presentation, and then let 40 minutes of questions go. Absolutely. So, I mean, that's the reporter talking. So what we're trying to do with the Hummel Report is do the stuff that nobody else is doing. Channel 12's been all over the testing. You've asked a lot of great health questions. I'm looking at the small businesses. I'm looking at stuff like the wedding industry and the kids on the bus and the crazy story out of North Providence that, is non-COVID related, but it's what we do with the Hummel Report. So we're trying to fill that niche. There's so few reporters now that people come to me with these testing stories, and I say, you know what? Talk to Ted Nesi and Eli Sherman. I will cede my territory to them because they are numbers geeks, and I say that complimentarily. So what do we have coming up? I used to have an executive, shall we say, with one of our media partners every year say, hey, so Hummel, what do you have coming up in 2016? And I'd be like, well, whatever the news where it leads us, I can't tell you. I mean, who on New Year's Eve 2019 knew that the pandemic was coming?
That's right.
Right? So we have to be nimble. And a lot of my stuff now, I'm not doing as many long form video pieces because in my mind, the quick ones like the bus and the wedding industry and the small businesses, which we've been over as a result of our questioning the officials at the briefing, those are far more important right now to get out and get immediately. And we're very fortunate to have the Providence Journal as a media partner. As much as they've been diminished, everybody's like, oh, the Journal isn't what it used to be. They still lead the way on news coverage. When the Journal writes a big story, everybody else follows. So that's worked out well for me. That was a long question that basically, Bill, you asked me what time it is, and I told you how to make a watch. So
you're learning.
I'm following in the bureaucrat steps.
Jim Hummel, ladies and gentlemen, follow him on Twitter at Hummel Report and HummelReport.org. Hunker down and watch some. You get a snowstorm. You can go back years and entertain yourself. I still love that Charlestown Railroad piece. I love that. The shot of the cow chewing grass as it fades out. That's Rhode Island journalism. Boy,
that's a long time. I will tell you, I'm a little wistful. I am not going to be doing any election coverage. Yeah. WPRO's got, I think they're limited in terms of they're not going to have everybody in the studio. They can't really do remote. So I'm actually, and I've worked elections since I was a college journalist in 1978, and I am going to be a consumer this year. I'm just going to sit back and watch and enjoy the show.
Nice. Well, we'll be running around the state. I'll be running around. I've got an interview booked with a candidate in Newport, South County, Providence, Cranston, Burrillville, and Warren. So I'll be burning through some gas mileage, doing some live streaming. But then, at night, I'll be sitting around just like you, consuming it. I don't have anything to add to that. That's for sure.
Yeah, I will be following you. And I think most of the TV stations understand this is a presidential. The story, look, the speaker's interesting in some of these mayor's races, but the real story is the presidential. So you're not going to be seeing a lot of cut-ins like we would, in the off year of general officers. The one other race I would that we didn't mention before is up in Woonsocket with Lisa Baldelli Hunt, who has been the longtime mayor, former state rep, John Brean, who was the vice president of the council. His dad was president for years. It's an interesting battle. People have wanted to take her out for years, her opponents, and haven't really had strong candidates. John's a former state rep too. So I'm going to be keeping my eye on that race as, is this the year that the alternative is going to win? So we'll see. I mean, Woonsocket's got its own little dynamic to it, but she's had a stronghold up there. But I hear Brian's been running a really strong ground game up there. So
it remains to be seen. Is it the year of the alternative? That may be the question
exactly
that we find out the answer to this week. All right. Jim Hummel. Beautiful.
Bill, it's an honor. When you say I'm a legend, that basically means I'm old as dirt and I've been around here forever. But you said it nicely. Thank you.
Look out. Yeah, that's the polite way of saying that, right?
This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
For daily content, follow the pod on social media. You can join the Bartholomew Town Podcast Facebook group by heading to btown.stream and follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Bill Bartholomew.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.